Good evening. I, Lasagna Flowers Ivory, Vice President of the Duncanville ISD Board of Trustees, call this meeting of the Duncanville Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of Board of Trustees is present, that the meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Our mission at Duncanville ISD is to engage, equip, and empower all scholars to achieve their unique potential. At this time, we'll have our opening prayer. Dr. Nix, will you lead us in prayer? Amen. Thank you. Will you please stand for the pledges? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
You may be seated. Do we have any communication? Do we have any communication from citizens? No. Thank you. I will now turn the meeting over to Ms. Andre Fields.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and to board members and to our leadership team and waiting audience. Again, good evening. I am delighted tonight that we are coming together for our first budget workshop for the 2024 school year as we prepare to look forward to 2024-2025. Tonight, we will hear kind of where our current state of affairs are in regard to our finances, our staffing, and we tonight want to give you information, have you have an opportunity to listen and then ask any clarifying questions that you may have. And so what we're going to do first, want to orient you what you have at your place here at the dais. First of all, you have the PowerPoint presentation before you with notes pages so that you may take notes and jot down any questions that you may have or thoughts that you may have about any of the information that will be shared with you. And we will be going through the presentation first starting with Mr. Garrison, who's going to, after my opening remarks, going to share our financial update, and he'll walk you through that. And then I will stop and pause for questions about that portion of the presentation. So as you're listening, you may jot something down on the slide deck sheet there, and then we'll, after your questions are answered or any thoughts you have, then Ms. Brown, Kathleen Brown, will come and talk about staffing and some of the things we're doing in regard to staffing, and then we'll allow you to ask her questions. And then at the end, we want to hear from you, board feedback, direction, as we work through our budget, budget for the 24-25 school year. So you have your presentation, PowerPoint and note pages. And then you also have in the green folder, you have information I'm sure Ms. Brown will be sharing with you. Some include staffing formulas, copies of our compensation plan as it stands, and a few other information items that she'll be sharing tonight. So we're going to get started, dive in. This is going to be hopefully interactive, and one, we want to give you information. There's no secret and surprise the what's happening in our public schools in regard to our budgets and finance. You're going to hear a little bit more about Duncanville's position and where we are. I think I've visited with all of you before, one-on-one or even in a group, about what we're doing to try and mitigate where we are with our budget and to balance our budget. And so we want to give you information tonight, and then get any feedback that you may have and direction that you have for us. I will tell you, this is not going to be an easy undertaking. If you've been watching the news, and you'll hear a little bit more from our staff members we've worked to try to get this as succinct as possible, so we can give you what you need so you can direct us. So then we come together again in May. We have another workshop before we have to adopt the budget in the month of June, so, and set our tax rate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Garrison, and they're here. We set the room up just like it was last year. We went back to the the meeting last year, so we'd have the room set up like it was last year. So I will turn it over to you, Mr. Garrison.
All right, good evening, Dr. Ivory, Board of Trustees, and Ms. Fields. It's a pleasure to be able to give you an update on our finances. This is the thing, the items that I will cover specifically. The budget process, which we've talked about in the other meetings as we've gone along. We'll look more in depth at the demographer's projections and what that looks like and what impact that will have on our budget. We'll look at some preliminary budget amounts, both current and for future for 24-25, as well as some budget efficiencies. We'll start with the budget development process. You're all familiar with this slide. It's been in every presentation related to the budget updates as we've gone through the year. We are still hovering in that setting staff projections, as well as budget priorities and assumptions and requests. Again, this comes back to the demographer's report we've recently received, as well as where we are currently with our attendance, as well as our enrollment projections and our roll-up for next year. And we have received all of the campus budgets to date. Those have all been have all been received from from all campuses, and the majority of the budgets from the departments have also been received. So we're real close to wrapping those up, and then the next step would be to formalize a budget that would be presented to the superintendent before we come to you for a budget approval as we go through. There are a lot of numbers on this slide. So these are the demographer, the most current and recently received demographer's numbers from Zonda, formerly Templeton Demographics. Name change, but these are pretty hot off the press. So these are new, and there's so many numbers that we couldn't get them on one slide. So what you see here are the elementary and intermediate numbers. And I think the main thing to point out is as you go across, you can see those numbers are declining, especially at the elementary level, and that has a significant impact, obviously, on our budget, specifically towards revenue, because we generate our revenue based on our number of students as well as our attendance rate. And those are also going to drive staffing projections. I won't get too much into that. That's more of an HR function, but all of those things tie together. And so when we go to the next slide, it gives you our totals, and you got your middle school as well as your high school numbers here, and you can see the trend continues. This last year, we experienced a loss of about 181 students. We're projecting going into 24-25. You see that there in red, a negative 136 from the demographers. And so we look at those as well as we look at our current numbers. We also look at our roll-up numbers. When we say roll-up numbers, our kids that are, say, in third grade going into fourth grade, and our outgoing seniors in the junior roll-up. So we take all of those things into consideration, not just the demographer's number of 136, but that is a telltale sign when you see that we lost 181 students this year. We're projected to lose 136, and then if you go a year, I don't want to go too far out into the future, but we're looking at 248 in the following year. When you translate those numbers to dollars, that 136 loss is a little over $1 million in revenue loss at a time when we're experiencing, increased costs and inflation and things of that nature. A positive is our attendance rate is hovering right now at 92%. I would expect that number to decrease a little bit between now and the end, just because Typically in all schools, as we get into the spring with activities and things, we'll see a little bit of a decrease, but we budgeted on 91%. So Phil, this is actually a pretty good indicator here. When we get into, excuse me, when we get into the revenues for this year, again, this is a portion of a slide that you've seen before in a presentation, but just going into a little more detail, I'm going to start with the 23-24 and just reiterate that was the budgeted revenue that we predicted that we would have this year. I do feel confident that we're going to be real close to that number. It's still too early to tell exactly where we will be, but we were the numbers that we use for projections for our ADA and attendance are pretty solid. What I will point out, though, is that due to the decrease in our tax rate and the $100,000 homestead exemption, when those were reduced, that means we're going to get less local revenue. Because we're going to get less local revenue, the state is going to supplement that to make up for that loss. That was part of what happened in November with the $100,000 homestead exemption. So I have not done a budget revision because we'll probably see that in May, but it's not going to change the bottom line dollar a lot. But what it will do is flip those, where you see that local revenues at almost 65 million and your state revenues at right at just real close to 60 million. You could almost see those numbers flip. So we're still going to get close to the same, but we're going to get more from state and less from local. And so that has been a positive thing. One of the positive things that the state has done is taken a little bit of the burden off of the local taxpayers. And then again, what you see there is what we've collected to date is almost 90 million. We have a remaining balance outstanding of about 44 million to receive before the end of the year. And then we get into the expense side and what that looks like. I'm going to flip back and then forth again because I want to point out this is where our $5.2 million deficit is. We've adopted a revenue budget of 127, and you see there an expense budget of roughly 132. So that's where we're showing we initially estimated that we would have less revenue than we do expenditures. This is a little more of a breakdown though from what you typically see because we've got to isolate it into categories. Your payroll costs are right at 110 million, 82% of your budget, and 82% of our budget in payroll cost. That does not include the $7.7 million that we have that is payroll in the ESSER side. So that actually would be much higher if we included that in there because it's two different funds, but yet it's still payroll that we have to consider. These are also revised amounts. These were a little bit, there was actually budgeted more in payroll, but we had some difficult to fill positions as everybody has in the state. And so a lot of times when those positions aren't able to fill, we can take and repurpose those money into contracted services because we still have kids that have needs that if we can't put a teacher or a service provider in front of them, that we have to contract with a company to do that. So we repurpose some of the payroll amount into a contracted services amount to meet those needs. So, but you can see, even though we've maybe moved some of those monies between those two, it has not changed. So we haven't changed the budget. The budget was adopted at 132 million. It's exactly what we adopted. So our expenditures through March, roughly 95 million. We have a remaining balance of about 60 million. As a CFO, I'm always hopeful that we never hit this number. I would like to not spend as much as what we budgeted, and always love to over collect more than what we were. I don't know that again, we're too far out to have that prediction, but we will monitor those as we go through. So just a graphic to reiterate that last slide is just showing you how big that bucket is for payroll. And as we're looking at budget efficiencies and how do we address these needs and still maintain the integrity of what the mission is here at Duncanville. Our total programming cost is roughly 133 million. 110 of that is payroll, and that does not include the 7.7. If you put that in there, we're closer to 120 million. So your remaining budget, when you think of we spend $133 million, but of that 133, only 23 million is spent on everything else we do here but payroll. Fuel, utilities, gas, water, electric, maintenance, repair, running buses, operations, supplies, travel, food, any of those things. So you could cut that completely out and it would still be a difficult thing to do. So you can see how heavy that the burden that when we have deficiencies in our budget, it really is heavy on the payroll side. That's not an uncommon thing. Again, some of this you've seen. This is a little bit more of a breakdown. Our fund balance is really healthy. It's another really positive indicator for our district. Just under, well, $64.5 million. We'd feel comfortable when we say available. We feel comfortable with that $11 million that we have. It's pretty expendable. 3 months fund balance is what we're required to maintain, and that's going to be just over $30 million is what we really have to have in the bank. And then the reserved amount is earmarked by the auditors for required things that we have to hold to. So that's a breakdown of our fund balance. The breakdown of our ESSER funds, I've mentioned several times that, we have basically $7.7 million in our payroll remaining that we're paying out of ESSER. Our remaining ESSER funds are $9.78 million. 7.7 of that's payroll. So just the breakdown of that, we have 12 coded positions that are roughly 1.2 million of that. And then the raises over the last few years, and that's what we pay out of there. So as we've given raises and compensation increases, those have been funded basically for ESSER. We just across the board. And again, we can't take back raises, so those are things that we know that are going to continue. There's some set aside funds there at about just over $1 million that required ESSER spending, achievement gap closing, things of that nature. Again, alluded to that. That's something that Dr. Jordan is instrumental in providing and making certain that goes in place. And then indirect cost. The remaining $1 million, my suggestion is that we pull that down in indirect cost. And indirect cost is when you have federal programs, there's a percentage of your budget that can be basically drawn down for the oversight, because we have people that work in all these programs, administering the programs, writing the grant parameters, doing all the drawdowns, things of that nature. And so they allow you to just say, hey, we're going to let you draw this down, move it over to your general fund, almost as a revenue offset. So this would go in to our general fund. If we had expenses that we needed, we could still spend that out of that $1 million. We would have to appropriate it first and then spend it. But there's less restrictions out of the general fund side than there is the payroll or the ESSER side anyway. So again, sometimes I would anticipate a question of, well, could we buy a bus or could we buy air conditioners or things like that? We could do the same thing out of the general fund and not have to do all the reporting we would have to do with ESSER by moving that over. So it's a really succinct way to do that that's allowable. So that's a breakdown of our ESSER, and those funds expire September of 24. So we will have those off the book. Now we have till December to liquidate those, but everything has to, that grant period ends in September. So this is a critical find in our budget to find a solution for. Again, this is another slide that has been in our presentation before. And I just want to drive home where we're at. You see that we've seen that decline in enrollment and how that's affected. So ESSER basically has taken care of itself. It's funded. We have the expenses and we have the revenue that offsets it. And so that's why those are in yellow. But when we focus on the general revenue and the expenditures, you can see that we were slightly over budget in 22-23, but in 23-24. We get into, that's where we had this current year that we adopted a budget deficit of 5.2 million. And so how in 24-25 are we estimating a $15.2 million deficit? Well, that's the combination of that 5.2 plus the 7.7 plus the loss of enrollment. So you can see if you compare the revenue in 23-24 to 24-25, we're having, for the first time probably in a long time, you're seeing a lot less revenue. Well, we're seeing a decrease in students. So that's a huge offset, but we're also not seeing a decrease in our expenditures. We have inflation, more cost in personnel. So all of our financial indicators are moving apart and all in the wrong direction. And that at a time that's coupled with that loss of those ESSER funds that helped us offset. So anticipated additional costs, again, inflation, fuel costs, utilities, insurance, all things we see personally, we still experience here at the district as well, and typically on a much grander scale just because of the size of our district. This does not even include any type of raise or equity adjustment for our, without considering any type of financial gain for any of our employees. So what kind of budget efficiencies are we looking at moving forward and considering as we're reviewing our budget and preparing for next year? Department budget reductions, campus budget reductions, considered reducing supplemental expending. So supplemental expending would be things like travel, food, any type of incentive programs, those types of things. And then we're obviously, you saw that 9% of almost 10% of our budget's contracted services. So, looking at those contracted services for, are we getting our return on investment for those? Are we utilizing those? Are we getting the benefit for those? Do we have to have those programs? Those types of things to make certain that we're being as efficient as we possibly can. Recommendations, I've already put these out. The department budgets were reduced by 10% as much as possible. All of the departments that could be reduced 10% were. Some departments, that's not an option. When you try to cut, for instance, operations in particular with fuel costs and insurance and things of that nature, you can't do that. It's almost like I hope to break even in some of those. So my hope is that some of the reductions that we do will help at least offset and eliminate some of the costs that we have. As you see, the campus budgets were reduced by 5%. All complied with that, but we also made those less because we want to impact students as minimally as possible. And so we felt like we were able to accommodate that. And it was really kind of a 5% average. It was a little more at the secondary than it was at the elementary because there's a little more leeway in their budgets. So that leads to, okay, yeah, that's my last one. Okay, now questions and discussion items for the first portion of the slides.
Trustee Savage Martin.
Just a couple of things. I appreciate the handout like this with the space for writing, but when I go back and look at the numbers, I'm not going to be able to pull that up unless I made a note. So if it was this full screens, I think that'd be better. We can write in the margins or on the back of the page. Okay. You know what I mean? So, and then the other thing, did the demographer come and I just miss it?
I don't believe the demographer came for a presentation. No, ma'am.
Okay. I find that useful.
Okay.
To hear, because they talk about the area as well as the school district area. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so
ma'am.
It gives you an idea that it's not just us, that it's a bigger place, and it just gives reasons for how we're reducing.
Okay.
Just
yes, ma'am.
Trustee Fahey.
Just something that might help Janice. This is being videoed, isn't it? This meeting? I was thinking maybe you could go back and have a big screen view.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I do have a question on the reduced department budgets. Is that department like that stems from administration, or is that each school's departments of like ESL or English, or what departments are we speaking of?
So financially, we define departments by each organizational code. So it's probably even broken down more than that. So fine arts, choir, athletics, okay. Operations, transportation. I'm trying to think of some of the.
That's okay. I have the idea.
Kathleen said HR, business services, administration. So okay. So even when we say, a lot of times we say administration, even in here, technology, HR, finance, student services, chief of schools, both of those. So every single org code was broken down by 10%.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Colton.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the presentation. I also have a question on the demographer's report. If you would go to slide 5. So for the next slide, I'm sorry. For the high school, for 24-25, or actually for 23-24, 34, the projection, or the actual is 4612? Or am I?
So
Oh,
that's the
okay.
current enrollment.
Okay, that is
That's
the
current.
current enrollment. Do you remember when the demographer was here?
He did not do a presentation, but he provided this study to us in February.
Oh, okay. Okay, in 33, 34, the projection for the high school is 3863. And I'm wondering why is that such a decrease? What factors, feed into that?
Based on the demographer's report, currently the enrollment in our lower grades, they are less than those that are currently in our sophomore, junior, senior age level. And so as those age out and the grade levels that come up are smaller, you're going to see that continuous decline in enrollment.
On slide 8, I have a question regarding payroll. Is that salaries and benefits, or is there something else in there?
That is salary and that's total. Yes, that's salary and benefits total.
Okay. I guess, can you go to the previous slide? So payroll costs through March are $70 million. And then the remaining balance is $45 million. And our budget year is July through June. No.
That's a good. No, you're right. It's a good point. There are going to be a couple of factors for that. Some of that may be, Esther, when I've run our reports, but the other is that is going to this is very likely a portion of that. There are benefits budgeted for every staff member, but not every staff member takes those benefits. So that's a portion of that as well.
Oh, okay. Or I guess can you look at it and then kind of tell us
Of course.
the breakout for
Yes.
that?
I have a question. Is she finished? Okay.
Okay. So I have a question on slide 11.
I don't see the numbers.
Or
Is that-
actually, I think, can you go to the next slide?
It just this one.
Yes. Could we get further explanation of the 15.2?
Yes, this is truly an estimate, and it's a very early estimate. The revenues would be budgeted off of values that we don't receive, even preliminary values, until April. And so I simply know that with the projections and student enrollment that we're going to have less revenue. So and that's why those numbers are so round in figures, because it's an early projection. And then of course the operating expenditures, I hope that we don't have to increase more than that, but I know that we probably are looking at a little bit of an increase. It'd be great if we could decrease it more than that. But the 15.2 is a combination of the subtraction of those two numbers plus the ESSER that we won't have. So including the payroll, the ESSER payroll, the 7.7, plus the difference between those to get to that 15.2. And again, just a very early estimate.
Okay, so the budget reductions that were proposed, how do they figure into this estimate?
Those are so the budget, as far as decreasing the 5% and the 10%, is going to be very, very minimal. And I think that's going to be, I'm hoping to offset maybe another $1 million or $2 million. It would be a stretch to get to that point, just because that's such a small. I'm going to switch back to this slide right here and show that all of those budgets, I mean, even if we cut all of 10%, that's only $2.3 million at 10% across the board. We did 10 out of the departments and 5 out of the campuses, and I can assure you we're not going to get completely 10% out of the departments. As a matter of fact, some of our larger departments won't see a budget reduction, so it's going to be very minimal, and that's why that doesn't impact. That's why it doesn't impact that very significantly. The impact, at the end of the day, the impact of any type of true budget efficiency is going to come from the payroll side.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
But yeah, I was just wondering what the cost is associated with any budget reductions that we're considering at this point in time.
And I don't have those completely because I don't have all of the department budgets back, but the campus budgets, I can pull those, and that's something I will have at the future board meeting. As far as this is what the total reduction was from campus budget. This is the differences that we made in the department budgets, as well as any increases as far as the significant ones like insurance, fuel, things of that nature. Some of the larger portions, those we'll have complete comparisons of those of where those came out.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Fahey?
Thank you. I had a question. Jackie brought it up. With the numbers of the salary plus benefits, with the benefits part of it, is that stipulated on like every employee taking the TRS insurance and we paying for every employee? But yet we know that every employee doesn't take it. So there's that leeway right in there.
That's correct. So all the TRS, all of those take that, we all contribute to all of those, but it's more the health benefits that we provide, the additional incentives to our staff. And so not all staff members take that, but we budget for that across the board.
Okay.
And so that does give us a little bit of cushion in our budget. But there are other things in the budget as far as like when we were looking at the payroll side of that, there are things that are such as, substitutes, overtime, things of that nature that are in there as well. That it's not just a straight, because I want to do that too, is where it's just a straight 1/12 every month that it should shake out. But we have people in, people out, positions unfilled, vacancies, those types of things. So the difference between that are going to be those things, the vacancies we've not filled, benefits that are budgeted in there that aren't spent. So it does give us a little bit of cushion. But honestly, I'm hoping that will offset any increases in our substitutes and overtime and things of that nature. It's also why it's really hard to tie this out until we get closer to the end of the year.
I have a question. Do we have a general idea of what percentage of our employees do take advantage of? If you don't have it tonight, that's fine, but just a general.
I do. We typically have over 3, maybe sometimes it's about 1,000. Sometimes we're about 1,100. So it just varies depending on the year.
What percentage is that of our
Let's see.
employees?
How many people? About 1,800. So how many? Yeah, almost half. A little
Okay.
over half. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Take it, yes.
Any other questions? Okay, you can. Trustee Phillips?
Thank you. Okay, you mentioned not having all the numbers from all the departments. Will we have this information? What's the timeline on getting all the information, all the numbers?
You'll have a lot more concise at the next meeting because I've just received those. I can pull those together, and because it won't be difficult to do. I'll have it at the next meeting. I can show exactly what their budgets were last year, and then also what their budgets are going to be this next year to show a complete comparison of the campus budgets.
What meeting are you referring to?
We'll have a budget. We'll have another budget workshop in May. Oh, yeah, that's next month.
We do have another.
Yeah, that at the next presentation.
Another one, but I just
My
wanna know
question
when
is,
we're
was there a
gonna have it.
deadline given to everybody to have their budgets in, and
Right.
did they just miss the deadline so that we don't have them tonight?
No, they met and even looking back at the presentation in the past, that wasn't a part of this. It was a part of the next
The
presentation.
next
So
one for me.
I have followed that kind of model of what was in there before.
Okay. You may continue.
before anything else we can get for you in regard to this portion? I made notes.
One thing I kind of see is we're probably to the point where we need to really have real numbers. I wouldn't budget in paying every employee for benefits when only 1,100 take it. And that's been years at 1,100. So that's pretty firm. So we don't have to guesstimate it at 1,800 guessing. We need to have real numbers. That's almost like giving every campus, regardless of number of students, a person. You know, we're past that now. So we've got to get serious about this. And I doubt tonight, definitely not from me, but I doubt tonight we're going to have any suggestions other than looking at what other school districts are doing. And I don't want to look at what other school districts are doing right now. But we got to have real numbers so we know what to look at. I'd like to see the demographers report. I'd like to have the presentation, but if not, I can go through there and read numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. We will certainly do that and get that information to you all and try so we can get our demographer here for you. We got those numbers kind of looking at the bond information. So I'll take responsibility for that in that regard, but we have that information. We certainly can get it to you and have someone come in the next. We got quite a few board meetings coming before the May meeting. So thank you very much for your feedback. We're going to turn it over now to Ms. Brown.
Okay, good evening, Madam Vice President, Mrs. Fields, Board of Trustees. This evening, it's my pleasure to present to you information regarding compensation. It will be directly tied to the information that Mr. Garrison has shared as where we stand with the budget. You have a green folder in front of you, and so I'm going to go through what's in your folder first, just so that when I refer to these documents, we will be able to easily locate them. So the first two documents that you have in your folder are staffing formulas. They have a combination of our staffing formula of what they look like for the current school year for elementary, intermediate, and then the column next to that will give you the draft of the 24-25 staffing formula. And you have that same document for middle school, and this will be beneficial to us when we look at a slide later. Right after that, you have a draft 24-25 new hire teacher salary schedule. And then you also have a proposed schedule that we'll go into more detail about for some hard to fill areas. And then the final document, oh no, not the final. You also have a thicker document that is the 24-25 compensation manual. It is a complete duplication of the current compensation manual. And then the last document you have that's stapled together is just a salary report. Last year, you asked for this information, and so I've just included it so that you have it as we go through budget workshops. And it is a salary report for teachers in the state of Texas. So you can see where different districts across the state and their compensation for teachers. Okay. So tonight, we will be looking at prior year compensation. I will also be looking at some compensation comparisons. So this is information that you're already aware of, but we will be talking through how you as a board have invested in our staff in the 23-24 school year. So we know that in the previous school year, our salary was at $57,000 for a starting teacher, and that salary increased for the current school year by $1,500 to $58,500. In addition to that, there was a salary increase for all teachers across the board. So when we changed our beginning teacher salary, there was a need for us to make adjustments and give an increase to teachers for equity purposes across the board. In addition to that, as a part of the suite deals to work in Duncanville, the $2,000 loyalty stipend for employees who have 15 years or more, we continued that this year as well. We also looked at, or you approved having $15 or more per hour for all positions or hourly positions across the district. And I have to tell you that that was so beneficial to us as an organization. It helped us to be more competitive. We do have some areas in which we still have needs, and we'll look at those in some later slides as well. But we've had a higher fill rate in our auxiliary department than we've had in many, many years. And so we are very appreciative of that. You all were just speaking about the district, what we contribute as it relates to insurance. In previous years, in the previous year, our employee contribution was $333. On last year as a board, you agreed to increase that by $40, so $373 per month. It's going towards our employee contribution. And so when we look at total compensation, which we'll talk about tonight, it's important that we remember the amount that the board has approved to contribute to our employees who do take benefits in the district. So when we talk about the $480 that you see, that's just $480 in addition to what was already being paid in the past. As a district, for each employee of those 1,100 or so employees we're talking about, it's almost $4,500 additional per year towards their benefits. So when we look at total compensation, it's important that we remember that. So we're looking at about $5.7 million that was invested in our staff for all of the items that are on the screen. Okay. So when we're looking at Region 10 and the region that we're in, which is one of the largest region in our area, we're looking at our average teacher salaries for the current school year. We are always looking at the comparisons across the board, and we look at what the low starting teacher salary is, which is that $43,058. On the high end, the average high end salary is $61,925. So on average, a beginning teacher in Region 10 makes $51,259. And the actual salary in Duncanville is the $58,500 for starting teachers. Right? And you're familiar with these slides, and so they are back. We can see where we stand currently for this year, for the 23-24 school year, with the increase that the board approved on last year, moving us to $58,500. You can see that we are exactly at the same point with one of our neighboring districts. There are 4 districts to the left of us that are paying less than that for a teacher with 0 years of experience. And then there are 7 districts that are in our comparison group that made increase last year as well. And so you see where we fall. And so the way I look at this slide is if that had not happened, where we would be, right? And so we are very appreciative that moving to 58.5, we're not maybe where we want to be, but it helped us to remain competitive in the market. One of the things that typically comes out this time of year is a UEA document. We've had people come to the board meeting and speak to you all about that document before, and I can provide that to you. And I always like to speak about that document because it is just a snippet when we look at teacher salary. That document looks at the top 50 districts and what they're paying in the DFW area. So if someone was to reach out to you about that information, I want you to know what it is, the top 50, and we are on that list, right? So when we look at over 80 districts in Region 10, to be on that list is not a bad thing. So you will hear, well, Duncanville is 35 on that list, but 35 out of what? So when we're looking at that, remember that's the top 50. And when you're looking at DFW, we're looking at Region 10, and then we're looking at the Fort Worth area. So we're looking at over 150 districts. So that may be coming to you, and so I want you to be aware of that. When we look at our starting bus driver pay for this year, we moved to $22 an hour. We were so excited about $22 an hour, but this is an area where we're continuing to bleed out, where we find it very difficult to fill bus drivers. But I will tell you that is the same. The districts who were paying $24.06 and the districts who are paying $22 an hour are all finding it difficult to fill bus driver positions, or just across the board. And so I think our people who want to be in Duncanville are here. One of our benefits that I'll remind you of is that it is a requirement in Duncanville if you work in the transportation department outside of the secretary in the department. We require for everyone in the department to have the license to drive a bus. If we did not have that, there would be no telling what we would do. And so that has been a benefit, but it also puts a strain, on our transportation department. So in a great effort, we also have people who are at campuses who drive buses. And that is the campaign that we're currently running, is to have additional people to become certified to drive buses for the upcoming school year, because we know no matter where we move this, everyone is looking for drivers. When we look at our starting custodial pay at $15 or more, you can see that this is an area where we're highly competitive. So when I speak about the fill rates and the increase in the fill rates in our maintenance and grounds and custodial, nutrition services, the warehouse, their fill rates are a lot better than in our transportation department. And this definitely has to do with that starting pay of $15 or more. And you can see where we fall with everyone else. We're highly competitive in that area. Okay. Mrs. Fields alluded to this at the beginning of the presentation about what's going on in education. And although we don't want to dwell on what's all going on around us, because it's also happening here, these are districts in Texas, some very close to us, that are needing to make some great changes like us as it relates to a deficit in their budgets. And so I would like to say on this slide that when we talk about payroll, if you look at any district across the state, payroll is going to make up the largest cost, because we know that it takes people to do the work that we do. And so that is not novel to Duncanville ISD. That's how it is across the board. And so we also know with that in order for us to combat the deficit, it's going to happen on that payroll side. All right. So what are we doing about it? So in our district, of course, we've been thinking people first, process second. However, we have to make some great efforts to start combating the deficit. So one of the first things that we're doing is strategic staffing and the new staffing formulas. Mrs. Savage Martin just said that we can't no longer be equal, right? It has to be a more equitable model. About 8 years ago, we had a model that was more based on equity, based on the number of students you had at your campus. And we moved to where if you're an elementary school, everybody gets the same thing, right? Or pretty close to it. We are not in a situation where we can continue that way. So the first two documents that you have in your folder show that effort to move towards a more equitable staffing model. The demographer's information that you saw, it shows the consistent decline. So for us to keep the same amount of staff in the crisis that we're in would not be very smart for us to do. And so we have changed those staffing formulas moving forward, received some feedback from our campuses in the process, but still are moving forward with those formulas. We also still, though, are having a tiering based on performance of the campus. So when we think of intervention support at the campus, we're not stripping that away because we know that intervention support needs to be there, but it will be based on how that campus is performing, and so it will be equitable as well. Everybody doesn't get the same amount of intervention support. And then we also have the hiring freeze that's in place. And although we get questions every day about, well, what about this one and what about that one? The only positions that we are currently hiring for are teachers and auxiliary positions, and everything else is frozen. That is a way that we believe that we can help to combat the deficit. It is very difficult to put a number to that because it depends on what's going to become vacant. But we are looking at every position as it becomes vacant, and we're not posting it to fill it at this time until we know how everything shakes out. And so that's where we are. It is different for us, but we are doing that also because of the strategic staffing and the change in staffing formulas. So for example, if we have a paraprofessional at a campus and we're no longer going to have that position next year, somewhere else may need that person. So we want to take care of the people we currently have first and get them in places before we bring additional people into the district. And so we definitely will be continuing to eliminate positions based on attrition. And we'll speak more to that on the next couple of slides. All right. So we'll take a look at an elementary staffing efficiency example. This will line up with the first document in your folder, which is the elementary staffing formula. So if we're looking at an elementary campus this year, that campus would have a principal, they would have an assistant principal, they'd have a counselor, they'd have an office clerk, an attendance clerk, a principal secretary, a PE aide, at least one instructional aide, a bilingual aide, one or two, depending on how many students they have at their campus, right? And then they'd have a 22-to-1 ratio of student to teacher ratio as it relates to their teaching staff. So on the new model, there is a number that a campus must meet or exceed in order to have particular positions at their campus. So it moves us to a more equitable model. So you'd see this campus this year, for example, had 305 students and all of the staff that I just named, right? On the model next year, they will be projected to have 351 students, and so we'll take a look at what would happen at this campus. So due to the need to have 450 students or more, this particular campus would not have an assistant principal next year. So I'll pause to say how these numbers, because that's always was the first question, like, how did y'all come up with those numbers? Well, we looked at dozens of staffing models across the state. We got information from TASB HR Services and did comparisons to see, okay, what will work for a district that looks like Duncanville ISD and where can we start, right? And so that's how these numbers came about. So there are many campuses across the state of Texas that have 450 students or less that don't have an assistant principal at the elementary level. So we didn't pull it out of a hat. There was lots of research done to come to these numbers. The next thing that would happen is if you have 350 students or more, you get a counselor. They have 351. So this particular campus would keep their counselor. The state tells us the ratio at an elementary school, that 22-to-1 ratio, unless we have waivers. So based on this campus, they actually would lose a teacher based on their 22-to-1 ratio. They would need to have 450 students to have the office clerk. So they would lose an office clerk. They still would have the principal secretary and the attendance clerk, but this is a position that we added about 4 years ago would go away. At that time when we added that office clerk, I want to just remind you the reasoning why. We were having some struggles with attendance and our attendance clerks being able to focus on taking attendance. And the errors and things that we were seeing. And so another person was added at the elementary and intermediate level to be that receptionist person at the front, right? And so we've become better. We've gotten better as it relates to attendance. And so that office clerk at this campus would be eliminated. The campus has 2 instructional aides currently based on their student numbers. They would lose an instructional aide. And in order to have a PE aide, you need to have 500 students or more. And that's just for safety so that we have a reasonable number of students with our PE teacher in the gym. So the campus would lose a PE aide. So when we're having staffing meetings with each principal, which we've already been having, this is the information that we're sharing and going through. A lot of them are showing up because we've shared this with them and received their feedback. They show up and they're like, I know, right? I know that that's what's going to happen. Not a comfortable conversation because your wheels are turning about, okay, what does this need to look like? What will this look like? Because I'm used to having these people. But this is our effort to become more efficient and equitable in our staffing model. Okay. The next example, we'll look at one more, which is a secondary staffing efficiency model. This is one of our middle schools. We've seen a steady decline across the board at elementary and intermediate, but also our middle schools have taken a huge dip as well. So at this campus for the current school year, the campus has a total enrollment of 539 students. Looking at their projections for next year, they're going to have another dip and go to 497 students next year. So in order for the campus to have, and I'll talk about what a middle school has, the current way we staff our middle schools is we have our principal. Every middle school has 2 or more assistant principals. And one of our campuses that has a specialized program has an additional assistant principal for that program. All middle schools have 2 counselors, and then they have a student-teacher ratio of 28-to-1. So at this particular campus, they would lose an assistant principal because they need greater than 625 students to keep the additional AP. They would lose a counselor because they would need more than 550 students to have a counselor. And then based on the drop in their projected enrollment, they would also lose 3 teaching FTEs. Okay. So when we're talking about the staffing efficiencies that are occurring at the campuses, I want you to know that this is not just campuses. This is for departments as well. And that is why we have the hiring freeze in place. So as individuals are resigning from departments, the same thing is happening. What do we need? How have we tiered the people in our department to see what do we have to have and what do we want to have, right? So if we're looking at our compensation for the upcoming school year, and we don't have to look at a specific document, but it refers to the 2 hiring teacher schedules and then also to that draft compensation manual. Right now, our recommendation is that we don't make changes to our compensation manual. Typically, it's 2 to 3 years for us to do that anyway, and so it is fine for us to stay there. And that impacts our administrative management positions, our administrative program positions, all of our principals, SLT, everybody that's in an administrative program role. Our clerical staff, that's AS, and then IS is our instructional support staff. So the minimum, the mid-max, everything would stay the same. We're not recommending any changes there. We are, however, recommending salary adjustments as needed. And the reason we would need salary adjustments are because, for example, we'll use a teacher. If a teacher came to us this year and they made $58,500, they had 0 years of experience. I mean, we're in the hiring phase, and we have this hiring schedule. If you look at the first one that says a teacher with 1 year of experience makes $58,700. If we hired someone in that already had 1 year of experience, they would be making $200 more than a teacher who was with us this year if we didn't make an adjustment. So the equity adjustment for a teacher with 0 years experience would be $200, so that they would have what a teacher with 1 year of experience would make. So that we are recommending across the board equity adjustments, but equity adjustments absolutely do cost as well for us to make those adjustments. So we're recommending that the new hire teacher salary schedule that you adopted last year at $58,500, that we stay the same with that. But we also are considering, for your consideration, adding a hiring schedule for fully certified bilingual teachers, fully certified self-contained special education teachers. And I have some numbers here to share with you about that. These are 2 areas that we have had a very difficult time filling across the district. We have 83 bilingual teaching FTEs, or positions in the district, and we have not filled all of those. As a matter of fact, out of those 83, 35 of them have either a full-time sub, a teacher apprentice, and 11 of them are vacant. And so we know, based on the demographics of our students, the needs that our students have, that we don't want to continue to have those vacancies as it relates to our bilingual certified staff. Also, our self-contained special education classrooms, it takes people who absolutely know what to do in those classrooms. And so that's our behavior classrooms, our FAST classrooms, our classrooms that serve our students with autism. And so we want to make sure that those are positions that we have a person who's certified in that field to be able to do. And so the hiring schedule you'll see for that is the second document, the second new hire teacher salary scale. This was come about by looking at the information that we have from other districts, our neighbors, stipends that they may have, to come up with what would be a competitive beginning year salary for teachers who are fully certified in these 2 areas. Now, this is novel to us because we haven't seen this happening. And so once we put this out here, if you choose to do this, everybody will be doing it. We're trailblazers like that. But we believe that this is a great effort to recruit, to be in line with priority 1, which is to recruit and retain high quality staff. We can't do it for every hard to fill area, but these are the 2 areas we're considering. We're also recommending no changes to our current stipends and sign-in bonuses. We believe that we're very competitive in that area, so we're not recommending any changes. So the things that you see here so far are approximate to the tune of $2.3 million. I will tell you that this could go up because we are looking at the equity adjustments for individuals in all of those pay grades, and that takes time to do. If you're on an auxiliary schedule, it's easy for us to do. We can say, or the teacher schedule, 0 year, 1 year to 30. When you're on the AM and AP schedule, it's based on your years of experience, right? And so we have to look at them on an individual basis to see what the budget impact will be. But when we come back together, we'll have a solid number. So that 2.3 is an estimate at this time. All right. So that's all I have for you at this time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Trustee Savage
In
Martin.
that, with all those changes, it's an additional 2.3.
Absolutely. That's an additional $2.3 million. And one of the things I failed to say is if we go back and we look at the staffing efficiencies that we're proposing at the campuses with the new staffing formulas, the savings that would equate to for us. And so right now would be at about $2 million if all of that happened this year. But since we're doing it through attrition, all of it may not happen this year. So when we look at the districts who are closing a school or riffing positions, that's why we're trying to balance it with a hiring freeze, so that if we say, okay, you're losing an assistant principal, when someone else is to have an assistant principal, we have to swap. We have to move that person over there. So I do believe that if we start here, if we don't get it through attrition, there will become a time where that will be our discussion as well, because that's the only way that we're going to combat the deficit of the 15.2 is on the staffing side.
I appreciate that decision that y'all are making, and you're doing it with facts. You know, it's factual. You can see it on black and white paper with the yellow line. But, and I know it's hard because these are people that you hired and that you work with. So I do know it's hard. But
Any additional questions? Thank you, Ms. Brown. Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Colton?
Thank you, Ms. Brown. What is our overall vacancy rate, or how many positions do we currently have open?
Wow. I apologize. That's difficult for me to say today, and this is why, because it's resignation and retirement time of year. So just today, we had 8 resignations. So it's difficult to say. But during the school year, if I can give you that number, typically we're about 80% fill rate across, if I'm taking everything across the board. But if I take transportation in isolation, they may be at 50%, right? And so we try to look at it place by place, campus by campus. Some of our campuses have a 95% fill rate, and then we have others that have a 70% fill rate. And so those are the campuses that we have to really focus in on and say, okay, we need you to hire early. Some of them have more full-time subs than others. And so when we look across the board, it may look okay, but when we look individually at campuses and departments, we have huge needs.
Okay, so the vacancy rate in transportation is around 50%.
Oh, I was throwing that out as as an example. It's better than that.
Oh.
But we need about today, as of today, we need what, 22 drivers? Yeah, we need 22 drivers today.
Okay. I guess, has there been any type of employee survey performed to gauge, maybe what the employees ideally would prefer, or something like that in the transportation area? I mean, what kind of perks would be attractive?
Okay. One of the things that I will tell you that we did in the past that was helpful, we did this right after COVID. There has not been a survey, I will say that. But we, as a board, if you recall, there was a sign-in bonus for our transportation department. What we found with that is we gave the sign-in bonus and we filled all the positions. And then after we gave the sign-in bonus, the people left, right? So Mr. Garrison was actually sharing last week some ideas of other things that we can do in transportation. For example, an incentive based on attendance. So instead of you just getting a bonus for coming, that you, when you have perfect attendance, because we need our drivers here every day, when you have perfect attendance, that is how we incentivize you financially. And it doesn't have to be anything like that we couldn't afford, but those are some of the things that we are looking at considering to bring to you all for consideration. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, it would be interesting to know kind of what the employees' thoughts
What
are,
they thought.
since
Absolutely.
the vacancy rate is so high. So has any consideration been given to raising, the salary to make it more competitive? I know, we're in a tough budget climate, but we need, bus drivers. They're critical to our operation.
As we've looked at the state that we're in with the budget, we have not looked at changing the pay across the board for our bus drivers, and that's just based on the other districts here that we've been in communication with and their need that they have as well. Of course, if we survey, I think our staff will say, "Yep, give us more money," but we increased to the $22, and we still, have had people to leave. So I believe if we were the highest in the state and we said we were going to pay $28, we might get everybody's drivers. But then what would that do to the rest of the budget is what we've been looking at. So our campaign that we're looking at currently, Trustee Colton, is how can we get more people who are currently in our district to drive a bus. That has proven to be so helpful to us. For example, we have a teacher over at Acton, and every single day he drives his bus, picks up students, takes them to Acton. Then he takes students at Acton home, and then he has another route that he does. So if we're able to get more staff members to do that, and to see, we have staff members who have another job outside of the district. We really want them, if you're going to have another job, we want you to have it here with us because we have the need for you right here. So we're going to try to promote that internally more. I think we can do a better job of promoting that to our staff than we have done.
So based upon the proposed staffing level adjustments, how many positions will be eliminated?
That depends on how many positions we have available for people to go to. But if we are looking, you mean like the number of APs or the number of aides? I do have that. I can pull that and give that to you all. And it's by campus and then across the district as well.
And so for the instructional aid, what is the forming allocation? Is it?
Oh, let me look at that document. That may be the easiest way. So if we're looking at an elementary campus, they have an instructional aid at their campus automatically because they're an elementary campus. In order to get the second instructional aid, that campus would need to have 500 or more students. Once they hit that number, they get a second instructional aid at the campus. And that doesn't include their bilingual aides. Yes.
Okay. And I have a question regarding contracts and, position elimination.
Mm-hmm.
So if the board has already approved, contracts for the upcoming year, and then a decision is made that we needed to delete or eliminate some positions, would that be possible?
So that's, well, with the contract, if they have a contract, no, unless we were doing a RIF, right?
Yeah.
And so at this time, we haven't considered a RIF. We've considered eliminating through attrition. And we don't believe we're going to lose all of them at one time. We believe that we're going to may get to that point at some time. So right now, that's why we have the hiring freeze. So we don't want to over hire people, so that we can give contracts and letters of reasonable assurance to the people who are currently in the district instead of giving them to people who we would be hiring in new.
Okay, but I guess all of the reductions that we talked about amounts to like 2 million?
Yes, just under 2 million.
Okay, and we're looking at a $15 million
Yes, ma'am.
deficit. So
that's the 2 million that I spoke about with staffing efficiencies, and then I think Mr. Garrison said a little under 2 million for the other budget cuts. So probably about 3 point something so far. And we know that we won't get to the 15.2 all in 1 year, but we know we have to make some efforts to try and get there. And this is our first step, and the efforts are going to have to become more intense as we go through this process.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And does that mean that in May, you may have additional recommendations for to address that 15 million?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Savage Martin.
Sorry. I don't know what page it is, but it says starting teacher pay comparison 23-24. When we're right there with one of our. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So sorry.
Oh, you're good.
That one.
Yes, ma'am.
Have these districts already decided what they're doing?
Some of them have. If you take Arlington, let's pick somebody out of the hat. They're at 62.5. That's their starting salary. But if we go here, you see, so a lot of the districts we see, they won't be able to possibly do anything either because they're in the same boat that we're in. But then there are some articles on the other side of this where some districts are able to do things. So it will just depend. We won't know until they go through this process and vote on their budgets as
Okay.
well. Yeah.
That's what I was hoping. I thought,
Mhm.
well, what do they know, you know?
Yes, one of the things that we've talked about as a district is bringing our, depending on what the board decides, bringing our compensation plan to you earlier than typically. We typically wait till the budget time to bring the compensation schedule to you. If we know where we are, it's always better to have that up front. So as we're recruiting and going to job fairs, our current staff, everybody knows if the decision is, okay, we're at 58.5, this is where we are. The sooner people know that, the better. A lot of districts have a hiring freeze that they have not publicized. And so sometimes when a person thinks, okay, I'm leaving Duncanville because if they're not changing their pay, but they apply somewhere else and they're not hiring because they're in the same boat that we're in. All right.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you go back to the slide that Ms. Savage Martin just addressed?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that one. It would be really helpful if we had total enrollment next to these districts, if there's some type of way to put that number, because while Grand Prairie is at 62,100, can somebody Google what their enrollment is for us?
It's in the document that I gave you right here, but I can put it next to these as well. The last document you have for every district, it has their enrollment on there, but I can definitely put it under all of these
So
as
what
well.
does it say for,
Look 'em up.
we'll just say,
Arlington.
they have 26,000 students?
Yes.
So 26.5.
Mhm.
So we're looking at the numbers. I think it's just important to remember that we want to be on the other side, but we have to remember that they have 13,000 more students than we have, which means they have more money for ADA. And so when we're thinking about apples and apples and making sure that we don't end up in a situation with good intentions. So all of the districts to our right also have larger student population. They have a larger enrollment. Well, Midlothian has a higher, what is it with Midlothian though? Yes, Midlothian is lower than us.
11,092.
So I was just talking about all of the schools to the way we're looking at it, to our right.
to the right.
I'm okay with where we are. I just wondered how set they are. Just like we're not real set right now, but your recommendation is very good. I don't mind where we are.
No, I mean, there are other people that may be thinking the same thing. And so since our voters and community watch this and they're not as familiar with those terms, I just wanted it stated for the record that everybody that's paying more money than we are also have more students that we have, and that drives what we're able to pay.
So if you look at this slide, the only district that is smaller than us that's to the right of us is Lancaster ISD. Yes. And they have 7,032 students.
Right.
Okay.
But just generally. And I think that with the goal of doing our best and being the best stewards that we can be with what we have and using our projections, sometimes, like you said, there are hidden things or things that are not public yet with other districts. So we want to just focus on, this is what we have, and this is what we know, and this is maybe where we have to go, and just being realistic with what our budget is. I appreciate the transparency and the innovation, where you guys are going with this may take place.
And if these are our competitors as far as sharing staff, maybe doing a report on who is freezing hiring, and let's advertise that.
You're saying we advertise theirs?
To our employees to make sure they know they can't go to District A because they're in a freeze. If they know it, you know, the grass is not always greener.
I don't know how I feel about that being our responsibility.
I don't either, but I'd like to know. That's why I asked why, how we can do a comparison now when we don't really know, is what my question was. And if it remains the same because everybody does a freeze, we go into two hiring schedules, then that's okay. That's okay. But, you know, teachers need to know that it's not the old days. It's not the old days anymore.
Trustee Fahey?
Yes, what is starting salary for Dallas ISD?
$61,000.
61?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? No further questions.
Thank you to the staff for your work. I want to again publicly thank Dr. Halachka for helping us with really pulling everything together. Thank you to our HR staff, Ms. Brown, Business Services, and all the leadership. Thank you. Thank you, board, for this opportunity. We took notes. I'm sure I wasn't the only one taking notes tonight of some things that we want to get to you, information. If I recall last year, you only had one workshop, and so that's why we're trying to do two, because I know this is going to be a lot more challenging than it was. Thank you for the input, the feedback. A couple of things I will say. Last year, when we set our new teacher hiring schedule, we usually are first in doing a lot of things, right? So once we set ours, our neighbors leapfrogged us. But I do believe in that many districts will not be increasing their hiring schedule. There will be some, because there's some fast growth districts in Region 10, as you all are aware, but there will be many. Even if a Dallas ISD increases, as you listen to the news, you know that they're also going to reduce staff, right, because they've already shared some information about that to the public. So we're working diligently to take care of our people, the people who have been here. And then also, I am really being very intentional when individuals submit their resignations. I've even asked Ms. Brown, we're going to put those positions aside so that we know where we are. We know it's going to be reducing staff. We have to do that. And this is our way of starting that process. It is not, I've talked to the staff, I've talked to the community members, all the places I've gone, how we have to go about doing this. And we're trying to be methodical and intentional, and then also taking care of our people. So thank you all so much for tonight. Yes, I appreciate it.
Trustee Colton?
I'm sorry, I do have another question. So if we had to reduce our budget down by 15.2 million, what would that look like? And I guess at the next budget workshop, if we can get that scenario, and what is the expectation as far as budget cuts are concerned? I know we talked about the 4 million, but what is our expectation?
Dr. Garrison, what would be the goal?
It's a very good question. It's really, that's very difficult to answer. I can tell you more predictively where we're going to be revenue and expense wise, but what is $15 million cut out of your budget look like? If I can, I'm going to go back to this slide for a couple of reasons. I'm going to clarify something. I knew that I had an answer for you. It just took me a minute to come up with it. The question on this slide right here is that the budget is at 109. The difference between the expended balance and what's remained to be expended is exactly 6.5 million, which is that 6.5 million in raises that's going to be moved over to ESSER. That's where that additional money is. As far as the campus budgets, the cuts to campus budgets, $110,000. I mean, so that's what I'm saying. It's pennies on where we're at, and we're hoping we can cut a little more out of the department budgets, but it's going to be difficult to get to 2 million. That's going to involve a little bit more contracts. So when you talk about an overall, that's why I'm saying I'm hoping that with what we are able to trim out with contracted services, a little bit of reduction to our department and campus budgets, I'm hoping that will offset the loss in revenue and the minor expenses. Anything that we have to do is going to have to come out of, any substantial amount is going to come out, and $15 million is a lot of people. I mean, just off the top of my head, 15 million and an average salary of $70,000.
Oh, I
That's
didn't
200.
expect.
That's 215 people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't expect for you to come up with an answer
Right.
tonight. But
No,
I
but
would.
that's
Yeah.
I really just speaking in generalities, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that. But I mean, in speaking in generalities, when you're talking payroll, that's a large amount of people, and so to be honest with you, that it would be impossible really to come up with a $15 million reduction immediately. We really need to have a plan for now to get, because we're at a critical time where we're really at the point where we're already adopting a budget. It has been mentioned, we've already issued contracts. We're having to do this through attrition. We're not looking at, so unless we were looking at doing a RIF, which I know that's not, I understand that's not a position we want to be in right now. So when you're doing that through attrition, you're really limiting that to, as Ms. Brown said, it depends on how many people we resign or how many positions we can combine based on certification. So you're really at the mercy of the circumstances rather than being in control of it. But then moving into the next year, being a lot more intentional and critical throughout the year of reducing those positions out in time and having a plan in place moving forward. I would say that it's going to take a 2 to 3 year period. The problem with that looking at even over a 2 or 3 year period is this slide right here, is because it would be different if we had even a little bit of growth, or we were staying stable. If we were gaining even 50 kids a year, so we were picking up a little bit of revenue as we go through as we're doing this. But as we're making cuts, we're going to be making additional cuts, because every year we're making cuts, we're losing more revenue. Right. So it compounds that problem.
So, do you know what other districts are doing as far as, plans to alleviating any deficit? If they have a 2 or 3 year plan, or if they, intend to make the, budget cuts this year, do you know?
Any of the districts I've talked to are doing all those things as far as eliminating ESSER positions, not minimal increases, been trying to minimize salary increases, things of that nature. That's really all the control that they have. The other part of it is one of the things that no one is really speaking to. We talk about the increase in revenue or how people are given salaries. The enrollment really doesn't drive anything anymore. That used to be a little bit of a factor, but when they passed House Bill 3, it equalized. If we get more kids, we're going to require more teachers. We're not getting more, we're only getting funding for those kids. And so the only real source of revenue is a TRE. Well, we've already done that. We have a TRE, and so we're maxing out our revenue. And so that's one of the things I know some people have done, is gone out for a TRE. It's increased their funding a little bit, but we're already there. We're already doing that. And so that's a huge factor. Yeah. One of my friends is a good friend of mine, is a superintendent or CFO at Prosper. They're gaining 3,000 students a year, but they're only getting money for those kids. They're having to hire 500 teachers too. So it's not like they're getting additional revenue. The revenue they have, they're having to spend on personnel. He's battling the same thing. They're wanting to give raises. He said, we can't give raises. We're not getting additional money. We're getting money for the kids that we have. So
Mhm.
the money, when House Bill 3 passed and they equalized that formula, we are now at the mercy of when the state gives us money. We didn't used to have that problem. We have that problem. And no one's realized that problem when House Bill 3 passed 3 or 4 years ago, because we've had ESSER money to bail us out. And so it's just kicked the can down the road to now here we are. And while they're sitting on money, until we get an increase in funding to our basic allotment, or they authorize and say we're giving a $2,000 or a $3,000 teacher raise, anything we do is going to come out of our budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Savage Martin?
When is the next budget meeting?
I believe it's May 13th.
So the week before, okay, I've got it on my calendar already. So it's the week before the board meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. So, yes.
Any additional questions? Being that there are no further items to discuss, this meeting is adjourned.